A glossy corporate tower gleamed under the morning sun, its mirrored windows hiding the secrets inside. The CEO, Richard Hale, known for his arrogance and brutal firings, stormed into the office. On his radar today, a quiet intern named Eva Carter, reserved, punctual, always scribbling notes but rarely speaking. The other interns whispered as Richard cornered her in the conference room. "You're done here," he said coldly. "You're too quiet, too distracted, and frankly, you don't fit in." Eva didn't argue. She simply packed her folder, thanked him softly, and walked out. What nobody knew was that Eva Carter wasn't just an intern. She was a deep-cover CIA operative, planted in the company to track suspicious financial flows tied to international crime, and firing her wasn't Richard's power move. It was his biggest mistake. Never underestimate the quiet ones, because sometimes they're not interns at all. Sometimes they're the ones watching everything. The city skyline glittered like a crown that morning, but inside the 35th floor of Hale Global Enterprises, tension always hung like a storm cloud. Employees moved quickly, heads down, careful not to draw attention. Everyone knew what day it was, Monday morning reviews. And Mondays meant someone was about to lose their job. Richard Hale, the CEO, thrived on it. Tall, silver-haired, and perpetually dressed in tailored suits that screamed power, he wasn't just feared. He enjoyed being feared. He believed leadership meant control, and control came from intimidation. As his elevator doors slid open, silence swept across the floor. Laughter died instantly. Typing became frantic. A nervous intern fumbled her papers, and her supervisor hissed at her to pick them up before Richard saw. Richard's polished shoes clicked sharply against the marble floor as he walked. His eyes scanned the bullpen like a hawk circling prey. He stopped by a desk, tapped his finger twice on a spreadsheet, and the trembling analyst knew his mistake would cost him dearly. But Richard didn't fire him today. He had someone else in mind. At the far end of the office, seated quietly at a desk stacked with neatly organized files, was Eva Carter. She didn't stand out. Average height, dark brown hair pulled into a simple ponytail, plain blouse and slacks. While other interns laughed nervously at jokes or fumbled trying to impress supervisors, Eva worked in silence. She was polite, efficient, and strangely calm no matter how chaotic the office became. And Richard hated it. To him, silence meant weakness. He mistook her composure for passivity, her focus for detachment. She wasn't one of the loud, eager interns begging for his attention, and that infuriated him. "Carter!" Richard barked suddenly, his voice slicing through the floor. Heads turned. The room froze. Eva looked up from her notes, eyes steady but unreadable. "Yes, sir?" "Conference room now!" A ripple of whispers followed as Eva stood and walked behind him. Some interns exchanged smirks. Others winced in sympathy. Everyone knew what was coming. Inside the glass-walled conference room, Richard didn't sit. He stood tall, arms crossed, staring at her like a judge about to hand down a sentence. "You've been here 3 weeks," he said coldly. "And in those 3 weeks I haven't seen a single spark. No ideas, no drive, no initiative. You sit there scribbling in that notebook like this is study hall. This is a billion-dollar corporation, Miss Carter, not a library." Eva didn't flinch. She closed her notebook softly, hands folded over it. "I've done everything that's been assigned to me, sir," Richard sneered. "Exactly, the bare minimum. Do you think that's impressive? Do you think silence and invisibility will get you anywhere in this world?" He paced in front of her, his voice rising just loud enough for people outside to overhear. He liked an audience. "I need leaders, fighters, people who are hungry. And you," he jabbed a finger toward her, "you look like you're waiting for someone to give you permission to breathe." The interns outside snickered, watching through the glass. One whispered, "Dead girl walking." Eva's expression didn't change. Calm, almost too calm. "You're done here," Richard declared, his words final, sharp. "Pack your things. Security will escort you out by noon." He leaned in slightly, smirking as though to savor his victory. "Maybe next time, try being more than invisible." Eva rose slowly, gathered her notebook, and nodded once. "Understood, sir." She turned, walked past the gawking interns, and left the room without a single tear, without a single word of protest. Richard stood in the doorway, arms spread as though to the whole floor. This is what happens when you don't stand out. Learn from her mistake. The office buzzed back to life, everyone pretending to work harder. But a few couldn't help whispering. Why was she so calm? Why didn't she fight back, beg, or cry? Richard didn't care. For him, it was just another Monday, another reminder that he was in control. What he didn't know was that Eva Carter had chosen invisibility, and firing her wasn't just arrogance. It was the single move that would expose him, destroy him, and reveal exactly who she really was. The elevator doors closed behind Eva with a soft chime, muting the corporate chatter above. She didn't sigh, didn't frown, didn't even blink with regret. Instead, her hand moved casually to her blazer pocket, fingers brushing over a small black device no one in Hale Global Enterprises had noticed before. Her cover as "Just Another Intern" was officially burned. But Eva Carter had always known it wouldn't last forever. She stepped out onto the street, sunlight catching the glass towers above, and slipped into the passing crowd. Within seconds, her posture changed. The reserved, soft-spoken intern seemed to melt away. Shoulders squared, chin lifted, her eyes scanned every angle of the street the way a predator studies its environment. Her movements became deliberate, efficient, more soldier than student. 2 blocks away, she ducked into a quiet cafe. The barista, a middle-aged man with kind eyes, greeted her like a regular. She gave him a polite smile, ordered black coffee, and slid into the back corner booth. Out came the device from her pocket, an encrypted transmitter no larger than a phone charger. She inserted a thin earpiece and tapped the side twice. A voice crackled to life in her ear. "Agent Carter, you've been compromised?" Eva spoke softly, eyes never leaving the cafe window. "Negative. I wasn't discovered. Fired by the CEO, Richard Hale." "Fired?" the handler asked, his tone sharp with curiosity. "Correct," Eva said evenly. "He thinks I'm weak, invisible. He enjoys humiliating people. He had no idea who I am. The cover is still intact from an intelligence standpoint." "Understood," the voice replied. "Status on the mission?" Eva opened her notebook, the same one Richard had mocked in front of the entire floor. To him, it was just scribbles. In reality, it contained weeks of coded observations, hand-drawn schematics of restricted server rooms, and connections between Hale Global and offshore shell accounts. "The trail is confirmed," Eva reported. "Hale Global is laundering through subsidiaries in Singapore, Zurich, and Panama. Money flows point to cartel affiliates and weapons procurement." Her handler was silent for a long moment. Then, "You're telling me Richard Hale is directly tied to international arms trade?" Eva's lips curved into the faintest trace of a smile. "I'm telling you the arrogant CEO who just fired me thinks he's untouchable. He doesn't realize the CIA has been mapping his empire from the inside." Outside the cafe, a delivery truck rumbled past, blocking her view. Reflexively, Eva adjusted her angle to watch the reflections in the glass. A man in a gray suit had paused at the corner, pretending to check his phone but glancing up the street too often. Her instincts sharpened instantly. "Possible surveillance," she murmured. "Tail at 6 o'clock. "Copy," the handler said. "Extraction available?" Eva's fingers tapped twice on her coffee cup. "Unnecessary. I'll lose him." She stood, dropped cash on the table, and moved casually toward the back exit. By the time the man in the gray suit entered the cafe to look for her, Eva was already gone, slipping into the alley, blending seamlessly into a group of office workers on their lunch break. The intern was dead. The agent was alive. That evening, Richard Hale sat in his penthouse office, swirling a glass of whiskey and congratulating himself. Another weakling cut loose, another reminder to his staff of who held power. He leaned back in his chair, satisfied. But satisfaction turned to unease when his phone buzzed. A private line. He frowned, answering sharply. "Who is this?" Static, then a low voice. "You're being watched, Richard. Careful where you move your money." Richard froze, eyes darting to the skyline beyond his window. He slammed the phone down, dismissing it as some crank call. But a flicker of doubt wormed its way in. Down on the street, Eva Carter sat in a dark sedan, watching the lit penthouse through a high-powered lens. She pressed a button on her transmitter, marking the time and date. "Subject rattled," she reported calmly. "Phase 2 begins." Her handler replied, "Proceed as planned. Just remember, men like Hale don't break easily. They break suddenly." Eva leaned back, her eyes cold, steady. Richard Hale thought he had fired her. What he didn't realize was that he had just walked into her operation, an operation that would unravel his empire, expose his crimes, and end his reign of intimidation. For the first time, the ruthless CEO had no idea. The real predator was already in his walls, and she wasn't leaving until justice was served. Richard Hale had built his empire on intimidation. Employees feared him, competitors envied him, and politicians respected him enough to look the other way. But for the first time in years, he felt something unfamiliar: unease. The mysterious phone call lingered in his mind. "You're being watched, Richard." He tried to dismiss it. He told himself it was just corporate rivals playing games. But later that night, when he opened his secure trading laptop, he found something chilling: an error message on a private account he'd maintained in Zurich. His password didn't work. The account was locked. He cursed under his breath. That account was untouchable, untraceable. Only a handful of people even knew it existed. And yet, someone had touched it. For the first time, Richard realized his empire might not be as invincible as he thought. Across the city, Eva Carter sat in a nondescript apartment, screens glowing in the dim light. She wasn't hacking. Others in her team handled that. Her role was infiltration, psychological pressure, and control of the target. But she watched the feeds carefully. One screen showed satellite images of Hale's private jet, currently grounded due to maintenance delays, orchestrated by her team. Another displayed encrypted logs of Hale's shell companies unraveling one by one as their assets were frozen. Her phone buzzed. It was her handler. "Status update," the voice said. Eva's eyes didn't leave the screens. "Phase 2 in motion." Hale is rattled. "Offshore accounts are being cut. His movement's restricted. He's panicking." "Good," the handler replied. "Now push harder. We need him to make a mistake, something that ties him directly to the weapons deals." Eva nodded, her face expressionless. "He'll crack. Men like Hale always do." By the next morning, Richard's carefully constructed image was starting to crumble. A rumor had spread through the office about an IRS audit. Investors started calling with urgent questions. His legal team couldn't reassure them because they hadn't been warned of anything official. Richard stormed into the boardroom, slamming his fist on the table. "Who's leaking this garbage?" He roared at his executives. None of them dared to speak. His assistant nervously handed him a folder. "Sir, you should see this." Inside was a news article draft, not yet published but circulating among financial journalists. It alleged that Hale Global was tied to offshore accounts flagged for suspicious activity. Richard's face turned red. "This is slander, lies. Get it buried." But even as he barked orders, doubt gnawed at him. The timing was too precise, the cracks too well placed. Someone wasn't just attacking him. They were dismantling him piece by piece. Meanwhile, Eva continued her silent war. She had slipped into Hale Global's restricted server room days before, under the guise of fetching paper files for an executive who hadn't looked twice at the timid intern. What they didn't know was that she'd planted a device, a small data siphon feeding everything to the CIA. Now, as she reviewed the decrypted logs, the truth became undeniable. Hale wasn't just laundering money. He was funding black market arms deals in Eastern Europe, disguising transactions through charities and tech partnerships. And the proof? It was enough to lock him away for life. But Eva wasn't finished. Proof wasn't enough. She needed him to expose himself completely. That evening, Richard received another anonymous call. The same voice, low and distorted. "You're losing control, Richard. Zurich is gone. Singapore's next." Richard's hands shook as he gripped the phone. "Who are you? What do you want?" A pause. Then, "We want the truth." The line went dead. Richard slammed the phone down, his mind racing. Who could be behind this? A rival? The government? Then like a flash, he thought of her, the intern. That quiet, mousy girl he had fired. She had been in meetings, always scribbling in that notebook. Always present, but never noticeable. The more he thought about it, the more it burned. Could she have been the leak? He laughed bitterly at first. Impossible. She was nothing. A nobody, and yet he opened his laptop and searched her name. Eva Carter. Oddly, her employment record had gaps. No previous job history. No school listed. Just a conveniently blank resume. For a man who had built his power on control, that blankness felt like a red flag. Richard's paranoia turned into obsession. He ordered his security team to track her down, pull everything they could. But the report came back within hours. No trace. She's vanished. That's when fear became reality. Eva watched all of this unfold from her vantage point. The CEO who once laughed at her, dismissed her as weak, was now unraveling faster than she anticipated. Target is spiraling, she reported into her comms. He's paranoid. He's starting to suspect me. Good, her handler replied. Let him chase shadows. The deeper his paranoia, the more mistakes he'll make. Eva allowed herself the faintest smile. Then it's time for the final push. She closed her laptop, stood, and adjusted the pistol holstered under her jacket. Richard Hale thought he was hunting her. What he didn't know was that she was already inside his world, guiding his every step toward collapse. By the time he realized the truth, it would be too late. Richard Hale wasn't a man who feared easily. He had clawed his way up from nothing, trampling rivals and buying his way out of every scandal that threatened to touch him. Fear was for the weak. Fear was for those without power. But now, fear wrapped itself around him like a vice. For 3 straight days, his life had unraveled. Bank accounts frozen, shell companies dissolved, journalists probing too close, business partners suddenly refusing calls. And through it all, one name lingered at the back of his mind, festering like a wound. Eva Carter, that timid little intern he had fired for no reason. The one who barely spoke above a whisper. The one whose eyes seemed to notice everything, even as she pretended to shrink in the background. The more he thought about her, the more the pieces refused to fit. Her file had been blank. Her history didn't exist. And now, when he needed to investigate her, she had vanished without a trace. For Richard, this wasn't coincidence. This was war. Richard summoned his head of security, Mason, a grizzled ex-mercenary who had followed him for years. I want everything on that girl, Richard ordered, slamming a photo of Eva on the table. Every file, every contact. I don't care if you have to bribe the FBI or break into the Pentagon. Find her. Mason studied the photo with narrowed eyes. This doesn't feel right, boss. If she covered her tracks this clean, she's not just some intern. She's trained. You don't want to poke a hornet's nest. Richard's face twisted in anger. I don't care if she's trained by the devil himself. She's dismantling my empire. Find her. Mason nodded reluctantly and disappeared into the night. But hours later, when Mason's encrypted phone should have buzzed with an update, Richard received something else entirely. A package, delivered straight to his private penthouse. Inside, a single manila envelope. No return address. No fingerprints. Just one photo clipped to the front. The photo was of Mason, bound, gagged, eyes wide with fear. On the back, a handwritten message in sharp block letters. Stop looking for me. Next time. It won't be a warning. Richard's blood ran cold. The next day, chaos spread through Hale Global. Federal auditors stormed the offices demanding files. Investigators whispered about arms trafficking and terrorism links. Board members called emergency meetings, their voices tight with panic. Richard locked himself in his office, blinds drawn, liquor bottle in hand. His empire, the empire he had spent decades building, was collapsing in days, and the intern he had mocked was behind it all. Finally, he snapped. I want her, he hissed into his private line. I don't care how much it costs. Bring me Eva Carter. But the voice on the other end wasn't his hired investigator. It was hers, cool, calm, sharp as glass. Richard, Eva said, still barking orders? Still pretending you're in control? Richard froze, gripping the phone so tightly his knuckles turned white. You surprised? She interrupted, her tone mocking but controlled. You wanted to find me. Here I am, What do you want from me? Money? Power? What is this? Richard shouted. Eva's reply was quiet, almost gentle. The truth. Then the line went dead. That night, Richard returned to his penthouse, bodyguards stationed at every door. Yet when he stepped into his study, she was already there. Eva Carter. No longer dressed in timid office attire, but in a sharp black tactical jacket, her posture commanding. A pistol rested at her side, not aimed at him, but close enough to remind him who held the power. You... Richard stammered, fury and fear mixing in his throat. You broke into my home? Eva tilted her head. Funny, that's the least of the crimes in this room. Richard tried to bluster, his old arrogance rising. Do you have any idea who I am? I'll bury you in lawsuits. Eva cut him off with a cold smile. Richard Hale, CEO, arms dealer, launderer of billions. You hide behind boardrooms and politicians. But I know exactly who you are. And soon the world will too. He froze. How? He whispered. Eva stepped closer, her eyes locked on his. Because while you were laughing at your weak intern, I was recording. Watching. Gathering everything. Every deal. Every lie. Every piece of evidence that ties you to blood spilled on foreign soil. She tossed a flash drive onto his desk. It slid across the polished wood, stopping inches from his hand. That, she said, is enough to bury you. Richard stared at the flash drive like it was poison. His empire, his life, everything he had built, condensed into one tiny object. You think you've won, he sneered, though his voice trembled. But you don't understand. I own senators. I fund presidents. I have friends in every corner of the world. You can't touch me. Eva's expression didn't change. You're right. I can't. But the agency I work for, they can. And they already have. She gestured toward the window. Outside, black SUVs rolled up silently, headlights cutting through the night. Tactical agents in body armor spilled onto the street below, their movements precise and unstoppable. Richard's breath caught. For the first time in his life, he was powerless. Eva leaned closer, her voice barely above a whisper. You should have left me alone, Richard. But you couldn't resist mocking the quiet girl in the corner. Now the corner is where you'll spend the rest of your life, in a cell. Within minutes, the penthouse was overrun. Richard Hale, billionaire mogul, was dragged out in handcuffs as neighbors watched in shock. Journalists swarmed. Headlines exploded. Global CEO arrested in arms trafficking sting. Eva stood in the shadows, unseen, watching it all unfold. For the world, Richard's arrest was justice. For her, it was just another mission. She whispered into her comms. Target neutralized. Operation complete. Then, without a backward glance, she vanished into the night. Days later, Hale's empire lay in ruins. His companies dismantled, his allies scattered, his name disgraced. In prison, he sat in silence, haunted by one face, the intern he had mocked, Eva Carter. The girl he thought was weak, but she wasn't weak. She was the weapon, and Richard learned too late what others would never forget. Sometimes, the quietest person in the room is the most dangerous one of all. The headlines didn't fade quickly. For weeks, Richard Hale's arrest dominated every screen, every paper, every whisper in Washington's marble halls. Commentators called it the fall of a titan. Analysts dissected every detail of his empire's collapse. Politicians scrambled to distance themselves from the man they once praised. But amid the chaos, one name never surfaced, Eva Carter. Her role in the operation was erased, her presence scrubbed from every file, her face blurred in every surveillance frame. Officially, she had never existed inside Hale Global. She was not an intern. She was not a witness. She was not there at all. For Eva, anonymity was victory. And yet, anonymity was also a prison. She sat alone in a small apartment far from the city, sipping stale coffee as the news anchor spoke about Hale's transfer to a federal supermax. Authorities estimate his empire funneled nearly $3 billion into illegal arms and off-the-record wars, the anchor said gravely. Without Hale, many of these networks have collapsed overnight. Eva muted the screen. On the table in front of her sat two objects: her old employee badge from Hale Global and the flash drive that had brought his empire down. Both were meaningless now. Both were proof of a life she could never explain. She leaned back, eyes heavy with exhaustion. For years she had lived between worlds, an operative trained to vanish, a shadow walking among ordinary people. To her neighbors she was quiet Eva, the woman who always carried groceries alone. To the agency she was an asset who never failed. But what was she to herself? The question gnawed at her, her phone buzzed. Not the regular one. The secure line, black and unmarked, the one only a handful of voices ever reached. She hesitated before answering. "Carter," she said. A familiar tone replied. "Herr Händler." Calm, professional. "Good work. Hale's networks are folding faster than we predicted. But you know this isn't over." Eva closed her eyes. Of course it wasn't. It was never over. "There's chatter," the voice continued. "Hale's partners aren't gone. Someone's already moving to fill the vacuum. We'll need you on point." She wanted to refuse, to say she was done, to remind them she was human, not a ghost they could summon on command. But the words never came. Instead, she simply whispered, "When?" Later that night, she walked the streets of the quiet neighborhood where she had hidden herself. Couples laughed outside a cafe. A mother pushed her child on a swing beneath the amber glow of a streetlight. A dog barked from a porch, tail wagging at strangers. Eva watched it all with a kind of ache in her chest. Normal life, the life she could never have. Her cover identities never lasted long. Her friendships, when she allowed them, were fragile things destined to shatter the moment duty called. And relationships? Impossible. How could you build a future when your past had to stay a secret? And your present could vanish overnight. This was the true cost of her silence, not the missions, not the danger, but the emptiness that followed every victory. Back at her apartment, she powered on the encrypted laptop the agency had provided. A new file waited for her, marked with a single word: Requiem. She opened it. Dozens of names appeared: arms dealers, financiers, warlords. Faces she had studied before, but this time one stood out. Marcus Vera, Hale's oldest, partner, ruthless, untouchable. A man whispered to run Black Ops, contracts that even governments denied, existed. Eva felt a chill crawl down her spine. Hale's fall had been a victory, yes. But Vera? Vera was a storm waiting just beyond the horizon. Her mission wasn't over. It had barely begun. Before shutting the laptop, she caught her own reflection in the dark screen. The face staring back looked tired, harder than it had years ago. There were faint lines around her eyes, small scars along her jaw. This was the price she carried, not medals. Not recognition, just scars and silence. Still, beneath the weariness, there was something else. A fire. A determination that hadn't dimmed, no matter how heavy the shadows grew. She thought back to Hale's last words to her, his sneer about owning senators, controlling the world. Men like him believed they were untouchable, but Eva Carter had proven otherwise, and she would prove it again. The next morning, the apartment was empty. Her badge and flash drive lay abandoned on the table, the only remnants of the life she had just ended. Outside, the street was quiet, the world unaware that one of its ghosts had slipped away. A black sedan idled at the curb. Eva slid into the back seat, her face calm, her voice steady as she spoke into the comms headset. Carter reporting in. "Where's the next target?" The sedan pulled away, disappearing into the morning haze. The world would never know her name, but the shadows did. And in the shadows, her war was only beginning.